Hi and welcome to the video. I bought this little Canon EOS R10 about a year ago, and I bought it mainly to have another spare camera in Costa Rica in case my R5 would fail, or if I just want to have something super light and compact, especially for the filming, because unlike the R5 this camera can film without a record limit. I somehow ended up using this camera more than I expected with several different lenses. And I need to say, for a price point of less than $900, I was really pleasantly surprised of what it can do. But there's also some things that I didn't enjoy so much, so I want to give you a balanced review about my experiences with the camera that hopefully can help you if you're kind of on the edge about buying this Canon EOS R10 or another camera. So let's start with the body. On top here we have this classical mode dial that also has a C1 and C2 mode that you can configure to your liking. We have a video mode, but you can also start the video recording kind of for a quick shot or something directly here with this red button. Then we have some more buttons on top and on the back. In total we have two dials, one on the back here and one on the top for setting exposure, ISO, aperture, whatever. Personally, I usually prefer 3 wheels, but I think we cannot complain too much at this price point. What I really like, and was also surprising me when this camera was announced, that Canon actually included a joystick for moving the autofocus point around, which comes in very handy. And then on the bottom here we have a combined SD and battery card slot. I will talk about battery life a bit later, but Canon is using the LPE17 batteries that they have already been using in the more entry-level cameras for many years now. On the back we have obviously the electronical viewfinder, and below we have the touchscreen that can be rotated. And I mentioned touchscreen explicitly because the R100, basically the little sister or little cousin of the R10, does not have a touchscreen. Here on the side we have several plugs or ports for the remote control, microphone, micro HDMI, and then finally USB-C, which can be used for either data transfer or charging. Inside of the camera we have a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, and the image quality I think is actually quite good. We just need to keep in mind it's not a full frame sensor, it's APS-C, so it lies in terms of details and noise somewhere between a full frame camera and a modern Micro Four Thirds. So I was quite fine with the resolution and the noise performance, the colors and so on. What I didn't like so much was how slow the readout is. So in the electronic shutter I got a lot of distortions and wobbling, even if the animals were not really moving, but I was just shooting handheld. Sometimes the bird was like kind of distorted from one picture to the next. We have the same effect as well with the R7 and a little bit with the R5, but here it's much more pronounced, so I ended up not using the electronic shutter at all. I basically shot in the electronic first curtain for basically all the time. In the electronic first curtain it's still very fast. It still shoots 15 frames per second, which is, I mean, it's faster than the electronic first curtain of my R5. The problem is a bit, it creates some kind of shutter shock, which can be a problem if you use longer exposure times, and of course it makes noise. I will quickly demonstrate to you how loud it is. So it depends on the animal if this is a problem or not. Of course the electronic first curtain of the R5 also makes some noise, but there I usually use the electronic shutter because it's so fast in the readout. This is not possible here, but again, if you come from a DSLR, it's still very good and it's really incredibly fast. I was pleasantly surprised about how long the buffer actually lasts. So I usually shoot in 0, and with this, with a slower SD card like a SanDisk Extreme Pro that was of a slower class, I managed to get 50 shots in a row before the camera started to slow down. That's not an amazing value, but it's at least 3 seconds or a bit more than 3 seconds of continuous shooting. Then I took a faster card that was a bit more expensive, and with this fast SD card I managed to get over 270 frames before the camera was slowing down, and then once I let go of the shutter, the buffer was cleared in a few seconds, really very fast. So if you shoot a lot of action, I can highly recommend to invest a bit of extra money to get a fast card. If you want to save some money and you don't shoot so much action, you can also get away with a bit slower card, but I would not go too cheap. I was very happy with the autofocus performance of this camera. We have the excellent eye detection that we are used to from many other Canon cameras. And I think the detection was almost on par with my Canon EOS R10, maybe slightly behind. The tracking, however, was not as good. The camera was just not as consistent as my R10, so even if I had the small frame on the bird that was following the bird around the frame and the bird was not even doing crazy movements, I just felt it was not so consistent, so some of the shots were not sharp. And I had this with basically all lenses that I used. This was the RF 70-200 2.8, the RF 100-400, the RF 100-500, the RF 200-800, the EF 600 f4 of the second generation, and the RF 600mm f4. Maybe I used it even on more lenses, but these are the ones I remember. It was really not a bad performance. I mean, especially if we look back at the autofocus performance we had in entry-level cameras like 5 or 10 years ago. This is a crazy good performance. It's just not completely on par with the R5, but I think for this price, this is really more than acceptable. I also had a bit more blurry shots because of like a camera movement than with my R5, and I think this is due to two reasons. First of all, that here I use the electronic first curtain, so I have this shutter shock, and second of all, the camera does not have an IBIS, so no in-body image stabilizer. If you want this, you need to go to the R7, which is a bit more expensive and a bit bigger. However, in most cases, I think this doesn't matter too much. It's really only a problem if you get a bit longer shutter speeds. I just realized it in direct comparison. And I also realized something that I didn't like is that the buttons are not as configurable as, for example, the R7, which is kind of the big brother of the R10. I'm not talking about the fact that the R7 has a few more buttons. It's more that sometimes here, even the button that you have, you cannot put as many things as you can on the R7, and I find this a bit sad because it's a software limitation. I don't know if Canon does it to distinguish the two cameras a bit more or to make this camera kind of simpler and easier, but I would have preferred some more options here. Another thing is that if I turn the camera off, the sensor stays kind of open and unprotected, and I would have preferred an option like we have it with the R5, that the mechanical shutter is used as kind of a sensor shield. Another thing that you should really be aware is that the battery doesn't last very long, so I can usually not get through a whole morning of shooting, which is possible with the R5 depending on how much action there is, but with this here, no chance, so you should really invest in some extra batteries. I have now 3 batteries and this worked quite well. What's cool is that since you have a USB-C charging and Canon also delivers the camera with a proper charger, let's say you were shooting the whole morning and you use 2 batteries. Over lunch you can now put 1 battery in the charger and charge it there, and the second battery you can just charge in camera by just plugging it to your charger from your computer, tablet, phone, whatever that is USB-C, and then you can charge 2 batteries in parallel for no extra price, so that's definitely nice. What I also found was that the indicator of the battery, it's not given in percent, and this one thing, but in general these like small bars that you have for the battery usage or for the battery status, they seemed very unreliable with these batteries on this camera here. So I would try to always make sure to have a second battery at hand. Even if it still shows that the battery is quite okay, it can really drop quite quickly. I also used this camera a bit for filming, as I mentioned, and there I enjoyed that I didn't have this record limit. I can shoot 4K, no overheating issues or anything, so I was quite happy with the camera. And overall, in the end, I used it actually more than I was expected in the beginning, and I'm quite happy about that. And I think you can see with the results that you can definitely take some nice pictures with the camera. The lens might be actually more important, but what I think is even more important is that you know how to take the pictures, how to approach the animals, how to play with the light, with angle, background, and so on. And if you're curious about that, maybe check out my ebook that I linked below. In general, I can just say I was very happy with this camera. I think bang for the buck is really amazing here. You get a lot of camera actually in a very tiny, lightweight and rather inexpensive package. So it can be really a nice backup camera, I think, for people that have an R6 or R5 and you're fine with an APS-C backup camera and you really use it mainly as a backup camera and maybe at some occasions as a second body. I think this is really a good option. So I also linked it below. If you buy over this link, then I just get a small provision and you support my channel. You can also support my channel by just giving a thumbs up, leaving a nice comment, maybe if you also have some experiences with this camera, and then hopefully click again soon when I release a new video.